Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. My name is David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. Each month, we will be discussing Polish authors who may or may not be new to you, starting with the 20th century up through the present. And we will look mainly at writers whose work is readily available in English translation. All of our discussions will be in English, so you don't need to know Polish to partake of this series. If you're a student thinking about taking a course in Polish literature or pursuing advanced study in Polish literature in North America, we'll try to meet as many scholars of Polish literature as we can at universities in the English-speaking world, as well as a few from Poland and elsewhere. We'll be speaking with critics, professors, and translators along the way. As we continue our journey into the world of contemporary Polish writers, I hope that we'll be able to have a few of those writers as guests on our program. So, if this sounds like your cup of herbata, let me say a word about the Polish language, which is challenging. For instance, in almost every language of the world, the word for tea sounds like tea, du thé in French, chai in Hindi, and in other Asian languages. In Russian, it's chai, but not in Polish. In Polish, it's herbata. So though Polish is a challenging language with many unique features, I highly recommend learning it. If you want to learn more about the writers that we'll be looking at, to read their untranslated works, to read works of writers who haven't been translated at all into English, who are many, then you might want to learn Polish, but it's not necessary for this series. So if that sounds like the sort of thing that you're interested in, your cup of tea, hit the subscribe button for updates on all the new YouTube videos from the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. Or you can follow a playlist of the newest episodes of Encounters with Polish Literature linked into the YouTube description down below. So, while many American readers might have the impression that they know absolutely nothing about Polish literature, there have been a surprising number of contact points between modern Polish writers and American culture. I began studying Polish literature in the 1980s, during the period of the Solidarity Uprising and its aftermath. As it happened, during that time, one of the greatest Polish writers was living in the United States, Czesław Miłosz, who was a great poet, critic, professor of Slavic languages and literatures at the University of California, Berkeley, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1980. Many Americans who may not be familiar with his poetry may know his book, The Captive Mind, the most stolen book that I've ever owned. I bought many copies of it, lent it to people, and never gotten it back. But that's all right. The Captive Mind is about the intellectual maneuvers that writers made to hold on to their integrity during the most severe era of state censorship in the communist period. If I were to tell a group of English majors, for instance, that I was going to talk about a modern leftist poet who was at Berkeley in the 1960s, who once wrote a stern letter to Henry Kissinger protesting the Vietnam War, who sometimes embraced pacifism and in his work addressed themes of nature, particularly in a long dialogue with the ideas of Robinson Jeffers, and who had an ongoing engagement with issues of spirituality and contemplative practice, extending from Thomas Merton and Simone Weil to Eastern religion. These students might imagine that I was going to speak about Gary Snyder, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, or Robert Haas, the now canonical Bay Area poets of that era of protest. Miłosz lived in Berkeley from his arrival in 1960, periodically spending time in New York and elsewhere, and toward the end of his life, in 2004, more time in Poland. But living in a place does not necessarily change one's identity. The Russian writer, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, by comparison, lived in seclusion in a compound in Vermont to protect his own personal sense of the Russian language, really. And he returned to Russia when he was able to do so. Though pacifism, nature, and spirituality were all characteristic themes of the California poets in the 1960s, Miłosz brought them with him when he arrived, rather than finding them at Berkeley. Perhaps he was just fortunate to find an environment in which he fit. But by 1969, he writes, quote, "The majestic expanse of the Pacific seacoast has imperceptibly worked its way into my dreams, remaking me, stripping me down, and perhaps liberating me." He said that in his memoir, Visions of San Francisco Bay. Exile is too easy a term to apply to a changing artist like Miłosz. He is just as much of California, I think, as he is of Poland, having influenced a community of writers in both places, and having been influenced by them. Or consider another writer. We might ask how many of us have bumped into another Polish poet on public transportation, Wisława Szymborska, who won the Nobel Prize in 1996, and whose work was featured, for instance, in the Poetry in Motion series in the New York City subways and in other cities. Many people know poems like Her Cat in an Empty Apartment, which is exquisitely translated by Claire Kavanagh and Stanisław Barańczak. Let me read it. Cat in an Empty Apartment. Die? You can't do that to a cat. Since what can a cat do in an empty apartment? Climb the walls? Rub up against the furniture? Nothing seems different here, but nothing is the same. Nothing's been moved, but there's more space. And at nighttime, no lamps are lit. Footsteps on the staircase, but they're new ones. The hand that puts fish on the saucer has changed too. Something doesn't start at its usual time. Something doesn't happen as it should. Someone was always here, then suddenly disappeared, and stubbornly stays disappeared. Every closet's been examined, every shelf has been explored. Excavations under the carpet turned up nothing. A commandment was even broken, papers scattered everywhere. What remains to be done? Just sleep and wait. Just wait till he turns up. Just let him show his face. Will he ever get a lesson on what not to do to a cat? Sidle toward him as if unwilling, and ever so slow on visibly offended paws, and no leaps or squeals, at least to start. Szymborska did not write in English, but her poems relay universal experiences and emotions that lend themselves well to translation into other languages, and they speak to an international audience, today finding many more readers outside of Poland than in her native country, I am sure. For those of us who remember September 11th, 2001, think of the poem by Adam Zagajewski that appeared in the following week's issue of The New Yorker, with Art Spiegelman's black-on-black cover showing the faint outlines of the Twin Towers. Maybe you can see that. Try to praise the mutilated world. Spróbuj opiewać okaleczony świat. I can remember reading that poem aloud in both Polish and English as part of a lecture on Polish poetry that I gave at Barnard College, Columbia University in 2003. And there were people reciting along with me from memory in both Polish and in English. Try to praise the mutilated world. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days and wild strawberries, drops of wine, the dew, the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watched the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees heading nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered. Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world, and find the gray feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. Many Americans, particularly New Yorkers, read this as a profound response to the events of September 11th. It was reprinted in many publications, circulated on the internet, and even appeared in religious sermons. The poet received new attention in publications as diverse as the New York Review of Books and Christianity Today. He was interviewed about his newfound fame in the Polish press in both Poland and New York. New York has a Polish language press. In Poland, where poets have long stood as the voice of a nation, it is not so surprising that a poem that seems at least to address or suits a national crisis should have such a career. But in the United States, it's hard to think of another specific poem that has had such a sudden rise and widespread influence in American culture. What would the candidates be? I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, The Road Less Traveled, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, maybe Amanda Gorman's inauguration poem of January 20th, 2021, The Hill We Climb. Zagajewski's poem first appeared in Paris in Zeszyty Literackie, literary notebooks, in 2000. Perhaps the reception of this poem is a true sign that a Polish poet might not only imagine himself to be a citizen of the world, but can in fact be accepted as such. New Yorkers, though they may know nothing of Poland or its wild strawberries, or the city of the Polish birth, of the poet's birth, that has passed from Poland to Austria to Germany to the Soviet Union, and is today part of Ukraine, Americans who know none of that still can see themselves in the mutilated world that Poles have seen again and again in the course of history. So if you are interested in writers like Miłosz, Szymborska, and Zagajewski, and not just poets like these, but Polish novelists, journalists, playwrights, essayists, and other writers in every genre, and you want to learn more about them and their contexts, then press the subscribe button and follow Encounters with Polish Literature. Let me introduce our guests, the editors of Being Poland, A New History of Polish Literature and Culture since 1918. Tamara Trojanowska directs the Polish Language and Literature program in the Slavic department at the University of Toronto and has also directed the University College Drama program. She now serves as director of the Center for Drama, Theater, and Performance Studies at the University of Toronto, where she co-founded the BMO Lab in Creative Research in the Arts, Performance, Emerging Technologies, and AI. Her current research focuses on the intersections of drama and theater with history, philosophy, and religious thought, and emphasizes issues of subjecthood and transgression. She has also contributed a paper on this subject to the book Theater Machine, Tadeusz Kantor in Context, a wonderful book edited by Magda Romańska and Kathleen Cioffi, published by Northwestern University Press in 2020. Her investigations of the dramatic and the sacred have resulted in a new selection of and extensive introduction to the plays of Roman Brandstetter in 2016, and a new book project on transgressive crypto-theology in Polish literature and drama, Polish theater and drama. Joanna Niżyńska is an associate professor of Polish literature and culture in the Department of Slavic and East European Languages and Cultures at Indiana University, Bloomington, the Central Campus, where she has also served as director of the Polish Studies Center from 2015 to 2020. She approaches her field from a comparative perspective and pursues research that crosses disciplinary and national borders. Her long-standing interest in intersections between trauma, memory, and the everyday are reflected in her monograph, The Kingdom of Insignificance, Miron Białaszewski and the Quotidian, the Traumatic, and the Queer, published by Northwestern in 2013. She is also co-editor of Germany, Poland, and Post-Memorial Relations in Search of a Livable Past, published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2012. Her new book project investigates contemporary Poland's cultural memory from the perspective of long-lasting imprints of communist politics of memory, particularly as pertaining to the Polish-Jewish past. And our final guest today is Przemysław Czapliński, professor and co-founder of the Department of Anthropology of Literature at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, in Poland. He is a historian of Polish and European literature, an essayist, a translator, a literary critic, a member of the Polish Academy of Sciences, director of the Center for Open Humanities at Adam Mickiewicz University. He is the author of more than 10 books, most recently, Polska do wymiany, Późna nowoczesność I nasze wielkie narracje, Poland for Exchange, Late Modernity and Our Grand Narratives, published in Warsaw in 2009. In English, he's published The Remnants of Modernity, 2 essays on Sarmatism and Utopia, translated by one of my own students from Columbia, I'm proud to say, Thomas Anesi, published by Peter Lang in Frankfurt am Main in 2015. Another book that he's published recently is Poruszona Mapa, The Shifted Map, Geocultural Imagery of Polish Literature at the Turn of the 20th and 21st Century. Also, Literatura I jej natury, Literature and Its Natures, published in Poznań in 2017, co-authored with Joanna Bednarek and Dawid Gostiński. He's the winner of the Kościelski Prize, the Prime Minister's Prize, the Kazimierz Wicka Prize for Literary Criticism, and the Jan Długosz Prize, among others. Being Poland introduces a new concept among comprehensive histories of Polish literature, in this case focusing on the period from the reestablishment of an independent Poland at the end of the First World War. Unlike earlier histories, which were told as one story by a single author, this volume represents a variety of competing and even contradictory histories told by many authors in the form of an anthology. One of my senior colleagues at Barnard gave me a copy of Kridl's anthology and history of Polish literature, published in 1956. Here, let me show these to the camera. Certainly, these histories need an update. Kridl didn't necessarily cover contemporary literature, even of his day, and Miłosz went up to about the 1980s. That's part of the reason that we need a new history in English of Polish literature. But let me ask each of our speakers, why do we need this particular kind of volume right now? What does it do in comparison with the volumes of Czesław Miłosz? There was another one published by Julian Krzyżyanowski that was translated into English, and of course, Kridl's volume. Tamara, let me ask you, why do you think we need this volume now?
So you mentioned a few reasons why this is so already in your question, and I think it's worth remembering that these volumes that you mentioned, Kridl's, Miłosz's, and Krzyżanowski's, that is already history. Miłosz's was updated in the 80s, so it went up to 1980. But Kridl's, it's 1956. His scope of interest ended in that volume, ended in 1918, and Krzyżanowski's was really a translation of a volume that was written for Polish students, meaning in Polish university students, rather than for the English-speaking audience. Each and every one of the volumes, and they of course performed tremendous service to the field of Polish studies in the past, but each is monological, that is, it's authorial. It covers a very broad scope, historical scope. So each tries to present the history of a whole of Polish literature up to that certain moment that we already mentioned, and really has a very classical understanding of literary genres. So it covers, the traditional triangle of prose, poetry, and drama. And also, which I think is very important maybe for our conversation to follow, it does, every single one of them really covers only what has already been validated by time as canonical. Also every single one of them tries to position Polish literature within the English-speaking world from a particular perspective, with some anxieties that accompany those perspectives at the time. So the world since then has changed so drastically. The shifts, cultural, geopolitical, historical, have been so immense that I don't think these volumes can serve the purposes nowadays for English-speaking, programs, courses, students, readers, because they do not address issues that are now forefronted by studies of culture.
Thank you, Tamara. Let me ask Przemysław Czapliński, since you take up contemporary prose writers and, in a very thorough and comprehensive way in your long essay on post-war prose, how do you decide who to include?
If we look back, we will see that the history of literature is an endless symmetry of literary works, unknown, unread, forgotten. A textbook on the history of literature is, in a way, a tour of the symmetry, a godless trip, because our goal is to turn the dead into the undead. First, because a literary historian brings back the forgotten ones to the social memory. Then, because it ties writers into certain orders, proposing to locate them in a specific historical sequence. And finally, to revive their speech. Language has the advantage over the body that it can be revived even when the author is dead. Thanks to literary historians, books from the past become undead and begin to look into our eyes, asking, are you really alive? How are you different from us? Of course, while visiting such symmetry, we ask ourselves who is worth reviving. Some other day when we were talking, you asked me, or you asked us, how do we know who will be the next Kapuscinski? Of course, it is the basic question or problem of every historian of literature, but maybe the answer is complex. First, no one could predict who will be next Kapuscinski, and maybe there will be no next Kapuscinski, no next Truman Capote, or Hunter Stockton Thompson, for instance, one of my favorite American reporter. This is what the history of literature is for, to show the uniqueness and singularity of a given creator, but at the same time place him or her next to the others, similar to him or her, but always different. So the task of our book was to show the multitude of worthwhile writers, but also maybe to prevent anyone to become a hegemon of literature.
Our world has changed dramatically, and what changed dramatically, among many other things, is the way we as academics collaborate, communicate, support each other. And we actually wanted very much in this book to create an academic community, to use this kind of polyphonic model of cultural analysis that would capitalize on many academic and cultural traditions, because you need to remember that we have authors in this volume contributing from very different points on the map, on the cultural map, on the geographical map. And of course, these points come with a completely different lenses. So methodologically, theoretically, culturally, we actually wanted to really include and build the richness of this book on our team collaboration. So this is actually a very important point in relation to the other volumes. It's not just a matter what period we cover. It's very much a matter how we cover what we cover. And I think that this very polyphonic transatlantic, methodologically diverse model is, I would say, the key of this book. And I also would like to maybe comment on what Przemek said, that we don't know who will become the next Kapuscinski. And we actually are not interested who will become the next Kapuscinski. We are not afraid of including someone who will not become, who will not reach the level of Kapuscinski, because I think that we really make this intervention into canonical thinking about literature, and you always risk that maybe you will include insignificant writers when you talk about contemporary culture, contemporary literature. So the idea is not so much to play safe and codify what for sure will be codifiable, but to actually treat yourself, your position as a historian of literature for this particular task, as someone who exists in a particular historical moment, so kind of historicize your own moment. This is a moment in time. This book is like a slice of a moment in time. And it shows what we considered at this particular point, we as an international team, what we considered as important patterns, figures, and luminaries of culture. We did not want this book to be the best of, because this is the problem, I think, the way we are in some sense doomed to teach literature in English language. So we were trying actually to go away from this catalog of best writers. It's a history of culture, not just of the best writers in literature.
We do have a very good example of this in this book, unexpected, completely unexpected, where you take a risk of, and the risk pays back. And of course, it's Olga Tokarczuk, who has a short profile in our book. But of course, when we decided to include her profile in the genre section, it was for reasons that were well defined in that section, and not because she was, in our minds at that time, the future Nobel Prize winner in literature.
As much as I love this polyphonic and non-canonical approach, I'm wondering, I know that there are people out there who will be saying, but canons are pedagogically useful. There's something to push against when students become older and more mature, that they help younger students or new readers to organize the information. How do you respond to people who say that sort of thing?
Canonical learning is one way of learning. I think this is a good question to pose, that of course we did pose to one of our authors, Bożena Szalkos, whom we asked to write about a canonical strategy. And that is a strategy of both learning, kind of cognitive strategy, as much as a strategy of teaching, not to mention other roles that canonical thinking may indeed perform. So, and she makes it quite clear, and I think very usefully so for our volume, that for the North American or English, more broadly speaking, English-speaking readers, that canon of Polish literature is very different from what the canon of Polish literature is for Polish university students. And of course, there is no need to develop this point, because it's self-evident, in terms of lifelong education and what's not. But so in a sense, your question about the canonical needs to be answered differently in a volume that is meant for readers for whom the canon may look very differently from the readers of this particular language and culture who were born into it.
When we talk about canon, a canon, it should be treated as a problem while it is connected with modernity and modernism. Because when we talk about modernism, a canon, we should know whether we talk about canon in need or a canon in deed. What is the very specificity of modernism? And this is also an answer to your previous question about another book about modern literature after 30 or 40 years. It seems to me that a handbook or a book on the history of modern literature should be written every 30 or 40 years, because modern history appears to be both variable and neurotically repetitive. As Karl Marx puts it, everything what is solid melts into the air, but we can add something. Everything what melts into the air forms clouds and comes back to us in form of a rain. And there is a set of repetitive problems: democracy versus totalitarianism, or authoritarianism, left or right wing, art engagé or art pure, art engaged or pure art. For the writer to write for masses or for the happy few. So it means that while talking about modern art, we should combine different perspectives and different shifting canons in the short periods of modernity.
We really don't want to look at canon as something that is self-explanatory, something that is internalized, and something that already hierarchizes our cultural values. Rather, we wanted to look at canon as something that is really a certain cultural device, a certain cultural way of thinking, of organizing meanings. And of course, as Przemek mentioned, it is a product of a specific formation in time. And we would like our English-speaking readers to also be aware that what they think is the canon of Polish or Eastern European literature, because sometimes it's not even Polish, but a larger umbrella of the region, is not necessarily how Polish culture itself view. So just an example, a good way to think about canon for English-speaking audience would be to think about the market of translations. What is marketable in translations? You mentioned Kapuscinski. Yes, Kapuscinski is known because Kapuscinski has been translated. Hanna Krall has only one volume translated, actually a selection from two of her volumes translated into English. Yet we cannot imagine the School of Reportage without her. So we would like our readers also to just take a critical stance to all these different devices that we use to approach culture. And canon, as Tamara mentioned, is one way of knowing, but we should be aware how this apparatus works, right? How it's built. And for English-speaking audience, it's built differently than for the domestic audience. Let's just put it this way.
And this is also why, of course, David, we do have the book also has a chapter on translation, understood, in many different ways. But one of the texts addresses this issue specifically because it's so important for the readers for whom we imagined and then finally did this book.
One of the things that I really liked about this approach, not playing devil's advocate for the moment, is that students who have intermediate or advanced Polish, but not absolutely fluent Polish, are making a major commitment when they read another book. It takes them longer than it would take them to read in translation. So they need to know what's out there that's not translated and what it's about and how it applies to their existing research. So I think this book is wonderful for that. This kind of approach, that it also gives translators ideas. Translators are always looking to, for what to do next, and the focus tends to be on contemporary writers, speaking about the market, as Joanna did. But there's just such a depth of material that is wonderful and interesting and untranslated. And I think this is a way into that whole vast ocean of untranslated literature that needs to appear in English. That's invaluable to translators, to students, and to people who are thinking about maybe they'll learn Polish and they'll learn to read these things that aren't yet translated into English. You have multiple grids that you map Polish literature onto, unlike these, the monologic texts that we're familiar with. You have a section on transitions or themes. You have a section on strategies. You have a section on transmission, translation, and issues of that nature, genres and those who don't like genres. And then there are perhaps grids that might be superimposed across those, across the categories you've already established. I mean, things that are very much in the air in contemporary politics. Questions of being Poland, right? Is it questions of nationalism and multiculturalism or Europeanism? We can go from one essay that seems very focused on defining what Polish culture is, and then I'm thinking, in the next essay, I'm thinking particularly of Wlodzimierz Bolecki's essay, where he starts off talking about, in 1918, Poland was 30% minorities, people who didn't necessarily all speak Polish as their mother tongue, that there were many cultures and many languages active in Poland at that time. So we have, and that's a question that goes over all these other grids. If I could ask Joanna, how did you come up with that conceptualization, and how do you see its value and so forth?
Being Poland has a four-part structure, and the three first parts problematize the fourth part. So the first part, called transitions, is the part that actually we get most questions about, because we wanted address in this part long-term cultural paradigms, such as Sarmatism, Romanticism, and modernism. Sometimes people ask us, well, you start your book with 1918, why do you talk about Sarmatism? Why do you talk about 17th and 18th century? Well, we do because these were cultural paradigms that in some sense organized Polish imagination, or imagination that still shape kind of imagination of contemporary creators. So we have, again, we start with a big questions, big cultural paradigms in our first part called transitions. And then we move to strategies of interpretation. We have four of them: canonical, transgressive, compensatory, and emancipatory. Then we introduce in the third part transatlantic aspect of Polish culture. So we talk about emigre literature, transnational literature. We also talk in this part, in part 3, we also talk about Polish literature in languages other than Polish. And I think this is a very important moment in this book, that Polish culture, Polish literature is not defined by its language. And finally, in that part, we also have a section on translation. Only the fourth part pertains to this most traditional aspect of literary histories, namely genres. And we know that genres have been discussed and shunned by literary theorists. But we believe that very often international audience knows Polish culture through genres. So people know Polish film, Polish reportage, Polish animation, and so on and so on. So we think that in international circulation, genres actually are important. And this is why we decided to keep this traditional part rather than search for different points of entries into the material that is covered in the genre section.
I think it's very important also to stress that we do introduce those very broad paradigmatic frameworks in the form of intellectual duels. These intellectual duels, particularly in the sections on Sarmatism, Romanticism, and Modernism, serve a very important role. And that is not only to present the scope of potential and very real positions that scholars take vis-a-vis these important questions about cultural, historical, political, ideological tensions that these cultural frameworks actually generate, not only for the past, but also for the current writers and readers. But it also allows, I believe, to, for all the other authors in the volume to somehow be able to not only relate back to these frameworks, which many of our authors do, but also for some to actually ignore them because they know that they have already been discussed.
Thinking about your title and the idea of beginning in 1918 is that they're very much focused on the impact of those ideas and those received structures on the 20th century, where if we looked at, say, Kridl, I mean, Kridl was trying to understand what was the 18th century like for a person who lived in the 18th century. And for you, it's focused a little more directed toward the present.
It should be said that in the history of literature, cut-off dates, strong dates are always a strong decision, but simultaneously an invitation to dispute. So we chose 1918 because this date introduces numerous historical changes. Communist Russia is emerging, the Habsburg Empire collapses, 19 new countries are created on the map of Europe. But not only that is important. Two additional points are important. First, in 1918, this year puts all European countries in a similar starting position. Take-off conditions, of course, were not equal, but similar. From that moment on, you can follow artistic activities for supranational unity and for national, so to say, distinctiveness. Secondly, 1918 refreshes modern art, painting, music, literature, and other fields of art face key challenges, face them anew. The creator has to answer the following question: will I practice pure or engaged art? will I create art for elite or for masses, documentary or fictional?
Given what a monstrous book this is. It's 800 some pages in the print version. The digital version that I have is 1,200 some pages. How are readers supposed to use this book? Should they just jump in anywhere? Should they try reading it from the beginning to the end?
We do not have prescribed a single mode of reading our book, though we do have a figure of a flaneur in our introduction. So we imagine as one mode of reading this monstrously long book, just playing with chance, being open to discovery, being open to being surprised and rejoicing in randomness of what you discover. So yes, it could be like sortes Virgiliana. You open a book at a particular page and you let it to take you in directions that you really cannot even envision. But alternatively, and I think you are this kind of reader, David, you can be a systematic reader and you can plan this journey according to your needs. So if you want to learn about post-war prose, well, you will go directly to Przemek's essay and you will get a wealth of directions there. And from Przemek's essay, you can go to small vignettes that present particular authors, that accompany longer essays on genres. So there's a way also to link, for systematic readers, to link their thematic interest in the book. And I'm sure there are many other eclectic ways to read, again, this, huge book. But I would say that the two ends of the extreme is random and systematic.
One of the things that I think that people can get out of watching this series, since we'll be speaking to many faculty from universities all across North America and around the world, could you say a little about your graduate programs and what you can offer students who might be interested in studying Polish literature? Maybe start with Tamara.
Thank you, David, for this opportunity. It's a wonderful platform to be advertising our programs. Partly, of course, because those are few and far in between in North America to begin with. But second of all, is that indeed they are, to a great extent, authorial programs that are built by singular faculty members. Although in the case of Toronto, I must say I've been very lucky to always have had a team of wonderful colleagues, whether those whom I was inviting from Poland, or my own graduate students who then sort of graduated also into becoming my colleagues in the department, or even replaced me when I was given other duties. So that is also a wonderful feature, I think, of the Toronto program, that although it does have one tenured professor, it also always has had a great team of people who have been engaged in the program. It's the only fully fledged Polish literature and culture program in Canada, and one that has a long history and distinguished history of great people building it up. To just mention Danuta Bieńkowska and Louis Zierbarn, who was also your professor and who unfortunately passed away very recently. It does have the full undergraduate program with minor, major, and specialist, and MA and PhD. And we have produced some exquisite PhD students who are now working in American and not only in American institutions. So it's a program, of course, I'm saying of course because that's the nature of the beast, located within the Slavic department, which as a matter of fact proves very often actually very beneficial, allows these programs to flourish and exist. They need, because they are small, they need a bigger structure to be able to survive. So the applications the application season is open, and I would definitely encourage people to consider.
Thank you, Tamara. As you mentioned, I did get my master's degree from Toronto in 1990-1991. And one of the attractions of studying there was in Canada, the department seemed more multicultural at that time.
It still maintains this this feature, and there is Russian, there is Czech, there is other than Polish, right? Ukrainian, Serbian, Croatian. So there is and all these programs have always been treated very justly, so to speak, with a sense of necessary balance. So it is still very much a Slavic department in that sense.
Joanna, will you tell us a little about Polish at Indiana?
So my department of Slavic and East European languages and cultures at Indiana University, Bloomington, because Indiana University has many campuses. I am in its central campus in Bloomington. It's one of the oldest and I would say most respected Slavic departments in the country. It was established in 1947. It has one of the most comprehensive coverage of different fields and regions. Of course, Russian being predominant, but Polish immediately after Russian, Czech, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, and Ukrainian. We have fully fledged programs for all of them. And it has a very long history. My department has a very long history of being an incubator of sorts of different strong programs. For instance, very well-known summer language program in Bloomington. Bloomington campus was well-known in the US, is well-known in the US for teaching the highest number of languages. I think around 70 languages are taught in Bloomington. So in terms just of the Polish program, we are blessed because we do not have this kind of situation that Tamara mentioned when it's a one-person show, an authorial program in which one person has to perform all kinds of duties and all kinds of roles. We have a full coverage of language and literature and culture in the departments with one tenured faculty, myself, and 2 lecturers who also teach literature and culture. Plus, that's a pretty big team for Polish program, 3 people in the department. Plus, we have faculty in other departments, well-known faculty that focuses on Polish literature, culture, politics, history, anthropology. You probably know the names such as Bill Johnston, well known for his translations, Patrick Kenny, historian, Halina Goldberg, musicologist, Elizabeth Dunn, anthropologist, and I could again mention other names. So there's a large team doing Polish affairs, let me put it this way, at Indiana University. And finally, we have kind of a pearl in the crown, which is Polish Studies Center, which is as a separate unit, separate from the department and everything else, which was one of the first centers established as part of exchange between US and Poland in 1977. It was one of the very first exchanges between the US and a country from behind the Iron Curtain. And its sister institution is actually American Studies Center in Warsaw. So Indiana struck the deal with Warsaw University that, well, we will establish Polish Studies Center, and you should establish American Studies Center in Warsaw. Of course, geopolitically, Polish Studies Center did not fare as well as American Studies Center, but nevertheless, it's a very active, very kind of recognized and lauded center on the map, on the academic map in the US, and it has extensive extracurricular offerings. I just finished my tenure as director. I was director for 5 years, and the numerous lectures, workshops, conferences, symposia, and other cultural and social events that we offered through the center were really a tremendous help for anybody wanting to focus on Polish culture, Polish studies field in general. So yeah, I think that Indiana University Bloomington is in a pretty good shape. And let me just add one more thing that is kind of a curiosum, namely attached to the department is a publishing house, Slavica, that is a pretty well-known publishing house in the US, specializing in Slavic matters.
Are there opportunities for people coming from the United States, Canada, and the English-speaking world to study in Poznań at Adam Mickiewicz University?
So I'm a member of Faculty of Polish and Classical Philology at Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Where is it situated? Where is it located? Please imagine a city right in the middle between Warsaw, the capital of Poland, and Berlin, the capital of Germany. Poznań is not only between two capitals, but also it is a medium-sized city, which means that it has all advantages of city, and it has not disadvantages which characterizes metropolia or huge, immense cities. Moreover, all the infrastructure connected with Polish and classical philology is in the building situated in the center of our center of the city. So it's near to everything: cinemas, theaters, cafes, pubs, and so on and so on. For someone who will come to us and will be not satisfied with restaurants, cinemas, theaters, but will be also interested in studying philology, Polish philology, our school offers intensive pre-study courses whose successful completion opens all doors for international students interested in pursuing degree programs taught in Polish. There are regular courses during the academic year, and there are, of course, summer schools. And as far as I know, they are both effective and great fun. The faculty focuses on Polish, Czech, Serbian, Croatian, Bulgarian, but also ancient Greek and Latin languages and cultures. Moreover, there are Mediterranean and Balkan studies, including Albanian, Turkish, Macedonian languages. Our expertise is much wider, however, and we also offer degree programs in other fields of humanities: film, audiovisual arts, Mediterranean studies, Polish and historical pedagogical studies, Polish and philosophy pedagogy studies, Polish and German studies, which was created a few years ago. We also teach professional courses in teaching Polish as a foreign language. Please feel deeply and warmly invited to our city.
So let me say a few words about the upcoming episodes we're planned out for the next 6 months. Our next episode, we're going to be filming monthly, will be about Witkacy, or Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz, and we'll be speaking with Benjamin Payloff from the University of Michigan. The following session, which I think should be released April 1st, will be Witold Gombrowicz with Bożena Szalkros from the University of Chicago. The next 3, we still are finalizing the dates, but we'll be covering Tadeusz Różewicz with Joanna Niżyńska from Kent State University. We'll be talking about Bruno Schulz, who is my own specialty, with my friend and colleague Karen Underhill from the University of Illinois, Chicago. And we will also be speaking about Wisława Szymborska with Claire Kavanaugh from Northwestern University. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, follow our playlist for encounters with Polish literature, and you'll be notified about all of those upcoming programs. I'd like to thank our guests, Przemysław Czapliński, Joanna Niżyńska, and Tamara Trojanowska. And I would like to thank our host and sponsor, the Polish Cultural Institute New York, directed by Robert Czaniawski, Bartek Remisko from the Polish Cultural Institute New York, who is the Director of Programming in Humanities and Literature, and he suggested this series and is acting as our executive producer. I have to thank our wonderful editor, Natalia Yudin, and fellow producer, who handles all the video editing, the technical and aesthetic aspects of this production. Our communications person, Claudia Owona Draber at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, who informs you about what we're up to next. And finally, picking up on a point that Tamara made, since he was so influential to both Tamara and myself, we'd like to dedicate our first episode to Professor Louis Irabarn, who translated some of the most difficult works in Polish literature. This is Gombrowicz's The Marriage in his translation. And he translated the novel Insatiability by Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz, which was a 10-year labor that he completed under the direction of Czesław Miłosz at University of California, Berkeley. He was born in 1940, and he just passed away in December of this past year. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you all again, or being seen by you all again in 1 month. Thank you very much.